And we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again on another episode of the Life Matters podcast. If you don't already know, I am your host, Kiana Monroe, neuro-linguistic programming practitioner and life and emotional intelligence coach. And I am here today, not with just any old body, right? This woman that you guys see here is so special to me, tuning in and joining us live all the way from, guess where? You guessed it, all the way from Africa. Thank you so much. My good friend Belle, she works very closely with me, with a lot of women and a lot of young girls. And she's on this same journey with me on loving yourself first, self-esteem, making yourself, understand that you matter, your voice matters, and, you have purpose in this world. Thank you so much, Belle. How are you? I know it's like
Hi.
9 to 10 hours ahead. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm good, thank you. It's evening, nighttime here.
It's
But
nighttime.
yeah, I'm very good. Looking forward to our discussion.
I know. So you're all the way in Rwanda, and you moved from Ghana to Rwanda.
Yeah.
And tell a little bit about what it is that you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me as a guest. Firstly, my background's actually in law, so I'm a corporate lawyer by profession, and I do a lot of things in the corporate law investment space. But where my heart really is working with women. And when I moved to Ghana, I really started working with women in two ways, working with young women in terms of empowering and helping them really understand their potential and achieve their potential. And that was really from a transition from academia into the business world, or helping them to become entrepreneurs. And so that was my first love. And then from that journey, I delved into the domestic violence part of supporting women. And it's not something that I sort of set out to do. I always say I'm an accidental advocate. I ended up falling in love with this area because of the number of women, young women in particular, that I was supporting. And
Mhm,
just these stories, these crazy stories coming up where a lot of it was rooted in their own self-worth or lack of self-worth,
mhm.
and some of the things they experienced that they couldn't actually define. But when you spoke to them, you realized, look, this is emotional abuse, this is physical abuse, this is sexual abuse. And so I ended up looking at that area from a legal point of view, but really from an emotional support point of view, understanding how to support women, young women, older women, my age group, who end up in that situation. Because a lot of African countries don't have the facilities, and we may have the laws, but we don't really have the enforcement around it.
Mhm.
And so a bunch of us just, really decided to get together and see how we can support women who find themselves in domestic violence situations, gender-based violence situations in the country of Ghana. So that's really where my heart is.
Yeah, I think that's where we connect completely. Is that Belle and I do a lot of work together to support women and young girls and help them kind of heal from the inside out. And today we're going to talk about you know how we get to that place where we are, women need someone like Belle and I. I mean, I believe that it takes a village, and I believe that stronger together. But sometimes we tend to allow the situation to get really bad. We allow ourselves to get in situations that are hurtful and that are harmful.
Mm,
Some are not of your control. As you guys all know, that I'm a trafficking survivor, child trafficking survivor. And so have no control over that. But there are some situations where women actually don't feel like they can use their voice and speak up for themselves
mm,
and get into situations that are more harmful than good because they feel like this is something that they deserve, or their belief system has taught them, this is your fault, or you triggered it, or you're not worthy of more, you can't have more. And most
yeah.
of the time I notice, as especially women of colors, we were kind of groomed and learned to and taught to take care of the man, and to put ourselves last, and to kind of be silent and quiet our minds and quiet ourselves, so that we can kind of raise them up. And sometimes that's at the detriment of ourselves. So
Mhm.
let me ask you, based off of, we do work together and we see this stuff all the time. But you are there in Africa and I'm here and I see it all the time. What do you think is some of the reasons why we don't speak up for ourselves? Some of the things that you've heard other women say.
I think it's multiple things. I think very much so, like you said, we're taught to take care of the men, and we're also taught that we are extremely strong, and we are. I think women of color are incredibly strong, but sometimes that strength becomes almost a curse for us. So you're just taught to just go through all the issues because you're strong, you can take it, just get through it, etc. I think the other thing is there's a lot of cultural expectation
Mm,
and family dynamics that
mm,
really enforce this whole narrative of gender-based violence. And I always say that in a lot of the African countries, we put such a high premium on marriage. We put a high premium on relationship. And so what happens is you close your eyes to a lot of things that are red flags in the interest of getting married. And often it's not your personal desire, there's a whole force, be it from your family, be it from your community, that are pushing you into this marriage that you know is very dangerous. And the other thing I think is an issue in our culture, in our context, is we don't really pay attention to mental health. I always say there's a lot of people that walk around with broken souls. We have, if somebody walks around with a broken leg, they will immediately get attention. If somebody goes through like a spiritual attack in the culture of, and I'll speak for Ghana, you will immediately give that person attention. We are very sensitive to spiritual brokenness, but we're
mm.
not sensitive to the brokenness of soul. And I think a lot of people just walk around with very, very heavy, broken souls. And there's really no remedy. There's no focus on, well, not, I won't say no, there's little focus on mental health. There's also little focus on how do you allow this person to heal from that type of brokenness. And I think that's a huge issue, and a lot of women walk into relationships with a man who carries a broken soul. They may not have received what they needed growing up. They themselves may have been the victim of some sort of abuse, not necessarily physical or sexual, but maybe abandonment, rejection, mockery, maybe a feeling of lack of self worth. And the woman walks into the relationship with this broken man, also carrying her own insecurities, maybe about her looks, maybe about things that happened at home, maybe about sexual violence in her youth. And then there are no tools that we give these people. We're just all happy for them to be married and go to their wedding and have a big party. But the wedding itself is not the marriage. And I think, especially for the younger generation, there's this big emphasis on this beautiful wedding, but nobody's emphasizing, the marriage, the actual substance of a marriage. And so I think those are some of the things that I've seen, really play a role in perpetuating violence and emotional violence and sexual violence in our culture.
Yeah, I agree. Having a broken soul and a broken heart, broken mindset and belief
Mm,
system, not understanding that there are a lot of like learned behaviors. I always talk about learned behaviors and how
yeah,
to unlearn like conditioned programming and these belief systems, but also, some of that are seeds that are sown, from the brokenness of our mothers and the brokenness of our grandmothers.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
it's embedded in us to tolerate, right? This is what you have to tolerate for love. This is what you have to endure for love. Love is hard work. Love requires work and it requires effort, right? But it doesn't have to be hard. And when it's hard, those are, like you said, the red flags.
yeah,
Most people don't pay attention to those red flags because they're kind of wrapped in their own like little red flag that they've made into kind of like a safety blanket, and
yeah,
they go into it with this mindset of, I'm already damaged or I'm already broken and I'm already, insert, negative belief system. And you feel like the person that, decides to come into your life and marries you, you settle because you think that that's all you can get because you are less than, or that's all you deserve because you are less than, or whatever the insecurity that you may have. And I think that that is such a negative way to operate in dating and going into relationships, because it right then and there doesn't really allow you to ask the questions that you need to ask to make sure, is this person a good person for me?
Yeah.
Can I pay attention to some behavioral habits and patterns of aggression and how they handle conflict, and how fragile is their ego, and how does that impact our relationship if they are not a safe space for me to say anything? If I say how I feel, if I express how I feel, are they going to react with violence and
Mhm.
aggression and anger? Are they impulsive? Like, those things are really, really important. And a lot of times we don't tend to ask for that, time to get to know that person. So then when you see it, when you are actually married, and I agree, there's so many people that are focused on the wedding. And I say, listen, it's not the wedding that makes the marriage. It's not the
Yeah.
jewelry. It's not the ring that makes the marriage. It's not the dress. It's not any of that stuff, right?
Mhm.
It's the day-to-day, sometimes the mundane, the effort, the consistent effort, whether you feel like it or not, type of exercises that you put into place when doing this thing called marriage. So when you are doing that and you notice things in your marriage, right? Loving yourself enough to speak for yourself and speak up for yourself, and knowing that your marriage is a partnership. And if
Yeah.
you can't use your voice and say, I don't like something, or this type of behavior actually makes me feel like I need to shrink, or it's not safe for me. This You're not creating an emotional safe space for me. Um, and paying attention to how somebody responds to that, and then not feeling like I'm I love myself enough that if you don't treat me well, and if you disrespect me, and if there's any form of abuse, whether it's mental abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, I have the right. I love me enough to know that this is not healthy for me,
Yeah.
right? This is not what God would want for me, right? This is not a reflection of God's heart in this marriage. And I have a right to speak up for myself. And if I don't see any changed actions after an apology, I have a right to leave. But in most cases, women stay. Women
Mhm.
stay, and they take the abuse as a form of love. Have you
It's
heard
a form of
things
it's
like
almost
that?
like being a martyr by taking this abuse, you
Yeah,
know? That's how much you love and how much, and I think it's often also linked to our worship of God, because we use verses like, "This is the cross that I have to bear
yeah,
to prove myself to God," that I can carry this heavy load. And I think we've justified a lot of bad marriages and a lot of bad, and not just marriages, like a lot of bad situations, like, this is the cross I have to bear, this is part of the difficulty, and life is not rosy, and it says, I've overcome the world, the world is evil. So
yeah,
we use these verses to justify why the woman, and you have men in very difficult situations as well, but
yeah,
often it's women. We use those verses to justify why the woman should stay in the relationship or in the marriage. Don't give up easily. Life is not easy. Keep persisting, keep in prayer, keep your head down. Eventually he'll change, etc. And I think, like you said, we should be able to use our voice. But the problem is, if you're only using your voice for the first time in the marriage, you're gonna have difficulties. We need to teach women to use their voice much earlier, to understand, like, you need to be able to say to yourself before you get into a relationship, not even into a marriage, do
mm,
I like me? And if you can't respond to yourself, in the affirmative, you need to take some time out. And I think what we do is we love to love, that we often go into relationships and try to find ourselves in the middle of the relationship. I think you've got to be able to say, do I know me and do I like me? before we start encouraging young girls to go into relationships, and certainly before we encourage people to get married.
Right.
Because oftentimes these women are trying to find their voice in this marriage.
Yeah.
And then it's really messy, because you don't even know what are your parameters, like what is acceptable to you. And especially if you've seen negative patterns from home, um, you're
Yep.
like, well, that's kind of what I expect. This is what my mom did, this is what my mom suffered, etc., etc. So I think we really have to say, until you are of a mature, disposition, and by mature, you have to say, like, I know me and I like
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
It will make it easier when you walk into a relationship, because immediately when you see red flags, you're like, this doesn't fit into my box of acceptable behavior. And
Right.
that's not to because I think sometimes some women take it to the other extreme, and then it's like you come up with some crazy high, perfection list for your partner, etc. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we've got to be able to be much more aware, self-aware of who we are and what is a good and a bad situation, what is acceptable in our domain. And that starts from an early age. And I feel like a lot of women start looking for that voice in the marriage, and then they go, all over the place with it.
Yeah, I agree. And you grow in your marriage, right? And you do sometimes try to find a bigger voice, but that's
Yeah,
evolving. And
it's
evolving
evolving.
together is a good thing. But maturing before you get into marriage, knowing who you are,
Yeah,
understanding what your non-negotiables are, understanding what you will not tolerate and what you will not accept. And so many times we grow up, like for example, I grew up with, my abuela on my mom's side.
mm,
She tolerated a lot from my
yeah,
grandfather. My grandfather was a Rolling Stone. He had like a whole nother family on the other side, right? But because but because he paid all of the bills, because he was the provider, and he was abusive to her. He was verbally abusive, he was
wow,
emotionally abusive, and we didn't see it when we were little, but we were told when we were older he was physically abusive. And there are times when she wanted to leave and the family encouraged her to stay, and
yeah,
she didn't know what was the right thing to do, and she felt like what you said, you have to sacrifice, and this is the cross you bear. You chose to be with this marriage, or stay and deal with it for the sake of the kids. But in all honesty, I wish now as an adult, I wish my grandmother would have left. I wish my grandmother would have left sooner so that it could show me that when you are mistreated and you are being abused by a man, you choose yourself, you love yourself enough to leave, not to stay in it, because that
yeah,
actually traumatizes the children, and it traumatized us as her grandkids, that we had to watch her suffer what for love. That's not what love is. And
yeah,
when people attach the Bible to tolerating abuse and abusive behaviors by a spouse, whether that's from the man or that's from a woman, because men get abused all the time
love,
too, especially in the form of emasculation, which I feel like if you can't if you feel like you have to emasculate him and tear down him mentally and emotionally, you need to love him enough to release him to somebody that can be with him and take better care of him, and vice
agree,
versa, right? But
agree,
learning these things and looking at the experiences that your mother had, looking at the experience your grandmother had, or anybody in your family who, however you were raised, whether that's foster parents or whomever, looking at those experiences of their loving relationship and saying, is that the type of loving experience that I want to have? Let
yeah,
me to know myself. Let me figure out what love is like. How do I give love to myself?
yeah,
And when you finally know that and you get into a relationship where you start dating, then you can start asking those questions and saying, is this person loving me the way I receive love? Is this person loving me the way I believe God loves me?
yeah,
Right? This is the Do I feel like, I am in the center of God's heart when I am close to this person? And if not, what do I do? How much time do I give this person to heal and to change when I address it? How do what is their response, or what is their emotionally charged reaction when they respond to me and I tell them something is not okay. And the minute I feel like my body, my heart, my mind is in danger, that is a red flag big enough
Mhm.
for me to say, it's time for me to go and it's
Yeah.
time for me to exit. And it breaks my heart that women feel like that is a cross that they have to bear out of like religious and spiritual
Yeah.
beliefs, because I feel like, take yourself down from the cross that you nailed yourself on, because you
Mhm.
deserve grace too. You deserve love too. You deserve forgiveness as well. You can't keep forgiving somebody who is abusing you and their
Yeah.
actions don't change. They're saying the same thing. The consistency is in their apology, right? But there's no consistency in change behavior. And that should be enough to say, I'm leaving. Because you and I, we've seen some of the worst cases. We've
No.
seen women not even survive, right?
I mean, it's really tough, and one of the things that I think is really like a big killer at the moment is emotional abuse. So I think we've kind of got there on physical and sexual violence. I think
Hmm.
we're seeing like, okay, yeah, that's maybe not a good thing, even
Hmm.
though I still feel like people are still hiding a lot of it.
Yeah.
But emotional abuse for me is like a massive, massive killer, and it's harder. Sometimes it's so intangible to even share your experience, and sometimes it comes with a lot of shame. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of women just sit there, and I'm seeing like so much deadness in the eyes of
Mhm.
women. And like you said, you can have a lot of that on the male side as well. You have a lot of survivors of emotional violence on the male side, but it's a huge, huge issue, and it takes a lot of courage to go against the grain of what your family's saying, what your maybe church or religious community is saying, and sometimes even what you are saying, right? Because I feel like a lot of these women, there's two women. There's the woman that wants to leave because, like you're saying, they're like, this is not healthy for me. But
Right.
there's the other part of them that's like, if I just stayed another month, would it be better? Would he treat me better? Would
Yeah.
he change? Is there going to be a miracle? And I 100% believe people change, but I think you also have to put them um, in a position to change.
Accountability.
You've got to give them, they have to be accountable. And sometimes that means stepping away, maybe going somewhere else and saying, like, you need to heal. Whatever this thing is, you need to get over it. And I think sometimes we don't have that flexibility. One of the things that we see with a lot of women is they stay in these situations because the man provides,
Yeah.
especially when you have children. And like you said, you've got situations that it leads on to death because the woman has gone, it's graduated from emotional violence maybe to some physical violence, and they stay in that situation. But often in the cases that we've seen that really become quite violent and then sometimes end up in death, it's usually because their children involved. And I
Yeah.
think that's a very hard thing for a mother to say, like, I'm going to separate my kids um, from their father.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, sometimes you're not taking into account the trauma that the children are going through. There's a case that we dealt with in Ghana last year, and she said, we helped her relocate, and it's very difficult because she's from a Muslim background as well. So she had a lot of kickback because for them, it's not just a shame. Divorce is just so frowned upon in our culture.
Yeah.
It's sort of like just grin and bear with it. But there's a huge, huge, huge community pushback. And it was like this big shame, not just from her family, but from her whole community. Even her mother, who was witnessing this, just kept saying, like, okay, it's fine. Like, you've proved your point. Go back into the marriage. And she's like, what are you talking about? But one of the things that she said to me that was so instrumental is when we moved, we got her out of her situation. And that's the other thing, she was working, but just not enough to be able to be self-sustaining. And
Mm.
that's the yoke that these men use.
Yeah.
So ourselves and another charity, like, we managed to get her out of the situation. We paid for a rent for her house for 2 years upfront.
Mm.
And that's the
Mm.
biggest burden for a lot of women. And then a few months later, we helped her kids go back to school because they had to come out of the school because the
Yeah.
kids in school were
Yeah.
being told by their parents that they were bad family because she was breaking up the marriage, you know. But one
Mm,
of the things she said is, my kids are now so loud. I didn't realize my kids are loud. They're dancing around the house. They're kids. And
yeah.
she then realized only at that point that the kids had been traumatized in the marriage because they'd become mute. And she realized, like, oh my goodness, I've just damaged my kids so much because she stayed to protect them and keep them in this unit called family, which is the most important. But when she left and the kids, they started to express themselves more freely, they were running around the house like they should as kids.
Yeah.
She went through a whole nother trauma because she realized, I've actually left these kids in trauma by me trying to do what I thought was the right thing, you know. And I think that there is a time that, you know, I'm never a person to say just walk out because, you know, he pissed you off, just leave, you know. But
Right.
I think you have to be sensitive to know, when has this relationship crossed the line, and when do I need to step out to save myself, and if I have kids, to save my kids, and maybe put some distance and some accountability and some counseling and some support and some prayer to see if there can be real tangible change, you know, and then see what happens from there.
I agree. I agree. Let me, and sometimes the one of the things that's really hard to see is when women stay in the relationship for the kids, but also it's when the kids are also being abused.
Oh,
When the kids are also being, so you love this man so much and he's harming not only you now, but he's harming the kids,
yeah.
and you still stay. There is something that has to change when it's not just harming you, but now it's harming your children, right?
Mhm.
Because now you are traumatizing them and you are planting seeds, whether you see that and acknowledge that or not, that abuse and that form of behavior is acceptable and it should be expected. And then you teach children that abuse is love. I learned that growing up,
Mm.
because with me, I was sexually molested and raped all the time from my uncle, from my tío,
Mm.
and no one said anything.
Mm.
So at 9 years old, I actually started to expect that type of abuse. I started to expect that this is, what love from your male uncles is supposed to be like. And even
Mm.
though in the back of my mind, I felt like something is not okay,
Yeah,
something
like,
about me is not right, because I still felt like I had to hide it and keep it a secret, even though I was 9. But no one was speaking up for me. No one was helping me. No one was saying anything. So it took me
mm.
to become an adult and go to counseling. But the behaviors that stayed, that I had to unlearn and
Yeah,
unprogram my mind and rediscover what healthy love is supposed to be. And
yeah,
it's not supposed to be abusive. To any woman and any man that is watching this, love does not equal abuse, not mental
yeah,
abuse, not emotional, not physical, not sexual abuse. Love is not abuse. And the moment you are being abused, you have to love yourself enough to leave. You have to choose you. You have to choose you and believe that an experience that is acceptable in the eyes of God is out there for you. You don't have to stay and tolerate and take that type of abuse, because you are not only hurting yourself, but you are
mhm,
hurting those who love you, who are actually around you and want better for you.
yeah,
And that's a huge, huge, huge thing that I feel like is kind of like the residue of tolerating abuse, the residue
absolutely,
of staying
absolutely.
and letting your kids stay and see or experience the abuse, as well.
And I think what you said about, like, you know, you're an adult now, but you're still counseling and still on learning, I think is something that we also don't do well. You know, you need to realize that when your brain chemistry is altered, you
Yeah.
need to unlearn certain things that happened, and certain belief systems and certain things that you accepted because nobody challenged it when it was happening.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's one of the hardest things. Like it's that first acceptance of I actually need to see a counselor, or I need to speak to someone, like a trusted person.
Mhm.
Because I also think that a lot of these things, when they stay in the dark,
Yeah.
they fester into something else, And I think a lot of times, you see, and this is, also just going to the male side, because I would spend a lot of time talking about women, which is really like the focus of what we do. But what we do really see is a lot of men who, there's some men who are just, you know dogs and random. And even then, I always feel like there must be it's something that triggered at some point. But
Mhm.
what we do see is like a lot of men who suddenly, out of nowhere, seem to erupt. And then when you go and understand the backstory, there's like all of these years of verbal abuse, issues in the marriage, issues in the relationship, issues from home,
Mhm.
issues with their father, issues with their mother. Some of
Mhm.
it may be sexual in nature, etc.
Mhm.
And they then go through life, and then suddenly there's this point, and it's like an eruption. And I think it's because we don't build into our culture this sense of, get to the stage and kind of spring clean your life, before you get into your teens, maybe at your 20s and your 30s, because we're always attaching more things. We're always learning new things. We're always changing. You're a different person when you're a teen to when you're in your 20s. You're very different from school to university. You're
Yeah.
different when you're dating. You're different when you're married. You're different when you've got just you and your partner, and
Mhm.
then suddenly you've got a child. Like, at every stage of our lives, I think we've got to be more open to unlearning and relearning, and being submitted to a teacher or a counselor or a prayer partner, like somebody you trust, to
Mhm.
just help you make sense of things. And I think that is such a healthy thing, because everybody's been through something. Um, but
Everybody.
I think we're just not serious about that. And it goes back to my thing about mental health. I don't think in the culture, in the African culture, we're very serious about that concept of, you know, dealing with issues and unpacking it, and
Mhm.
like allowing me to like sift through it, and then saying, okay, cool, I understand how that happened. I don't
Mhm.
agree with it. I didn't like it, but I understand why this triggered this. I understand how I reacted. And now I've kind of got a clean slate to move on. It doesn't excuse or ignore or erase what happened.
Mhm.
But I feel like we need to be doing more of that, as women and as men as well.
I agree. And then just kind of tapping on when it comes to men, because I counsel men as well as women, and
Yeah.
some of the things that I notice is the the easiness of acceptance when men allow women to abuse them verbally and
Mhm.
emotionally and sometimes mentally, and that they feel like there's no safe space for them to be vulnerable, and
Absolutely.
they don't know if they should speak up because a woman has hit them or threw something at them, and because they're men that they're just supposed to take it, because
Yeah.
they're men that it's okay that women like curse them out and say all the things that they're not, like you're not a real man and you're not good enough and you ain't shit, and just like all these different things. That's abuse.
It
That's abuse,
certainly is.
and it will
It's
really
abuse.
drag down someone's self-esteem.
Yeah.
And just because you are a man doesn't mean that you have to accept a woman speaking to you in that way, because even if she's being honest about something that she's saying to you, if there's some truth in there, right, the honesty doesn't have to be brutal. I don't believe in the brutal honesty. Honesty
Exactly.
can be delivered in kindness. Honesty can be delivered in compassion. Honesty and communication can be delivered in love. There's a way to
Yeah.
say what you need to say to someone and get your point across.
Yeah.
um, and
Yeah. So good.
when it comes to like growing and evolving and then going to counseling, we are constantly learning. And then
Mhm.
everyone has been through a little bit of something. And one of the things that I try to encourage women to do too, because sometimes you wake up and you find yourself in a situation and you're like, how did I get there? Because you ignored certain things.
Yeah.
My own personal story is, just in 2016, 2017, I told myself, I felt really bad because I felt like I should know better. But I saw the red flags with someone that I was dating. And he shared that, he was abused as a child. He had a dad and his mother left, right? Um,
Mm,
but left later. But they were abused really bad. They would get burned with irons or have their hand put on a hot stove as a form of punishment and get beaten really often. And he even heard his mother be sexually assaulted. He heard, and he was in another room, and he was about, 7, 8, 9 years old. And he heard that. And he was, instead of ever going to therapy, I told myself, well, I've been in enough therapy, right? I see the signs.
yeah, I can help.
I can help, right? I've been to therapy. I can help. Like I was just like, he's got so many good things, right? And this sometimes is where we make a mistake
Mm,
when it comes to relationships is you see potential, right?
yeah,
And some of the times the potential that you see manifests in the relationship in real time, but they're like little bits and pieces of it. But it is masked and it is actually voided when the abuse comes in.
yeah,
And I said, you know what? I know where this comes from. I know where it's rooted. And if he could just go to therapy, right, and heal his mindset, then his
mm,
actions and behaviors towards me will change. He
yeah,
has so much fear, right, that he needs to understand that I am different from the other women that he has been in relationships with.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I stayed longer than I should
You
have
should have.
stayed with
Absolutely.
pushing and encouraging him to go to therapy and all of that jazz. And instead of leaving, when I saw those red flags, feeling
Yeah,
like, my love is strong enough. I didn't say, can I accept this person for who they're showing me right now if they don't change anything at all? Because they may
yeah,
not go to therapy when I want them to go to therapy. And it's not my job to force that. They have to want to do that, right? So not telling myself those things, I set my
yeah.
environment up to be in a position to be abused, right? And one of the things that is a big thing for me that I don't really do, I don't date a man that drinks, especially like drinks heavily. You can have like a little wine, a
Mm,
little drinking, but drinking, I gotta pour myself
yeah,
a drink or some whiskey or some that to me, because I don't
mm,
want anyone to change who they are when around,
because of,
then
yeah,
apologize for that behavior
yeah,
later, right?
100% agree.
Tolerated that because I felt like his drinking was a way to kind of soothe. And
Yeah,
and I came home to one day, I had a feeling and it was like a wave of I'm something just don't feel right. And I went home and he was like pissy drunk on the very same weekend that he finally decided to go to therapy. Right. And I
mm,
said, don't do therapy, right? And then drink because those two combined, if your therapist brings things to surface that were like way down, you got to process that, and alcohol is not good, is not a good fixer. And he
yeah,
didn't listen to that. He drank very, very heavy, and he literally beat the shit out of me when I came home, right? And for me, I was just like, you only get one time to put hands on me, and that's it, right? But I should have left when there was all the mental and emotional
other sign.
and
Yeah,
there's other signs, the verbal abuse, the mental abuse, the emotional abuse, right?
yeah,
Not the physical abuse. But if I go back and look at it, I say he has the potential to like knock the hell out of me, because he gets aggressive and he gets very angry and he doesn't tolerate that and then he'll drink it. One day I told myself he has the potential to probably hit me. And I told myself, I don't think so. He's never done that. I've not seen that sign. If I can just get him to go to therapy, it'll be fine,
yeah.
right? But it that wasn't the case, and I shouldn't have waited until he physically harmed me to leave.
Okay, yeah,
I should have waited sooner. But my belief of fixing and healing, and just because I went to counseling and I recognize how much forgiveness I need. One of my friends who I love so much, her name is Leanne, actually. Leanne
mm,
said, Kiana, the life experiences that you have, right? And the forgiveness that you need doesn't mean that that's the forgiveness you need to extend to everybody else.
true.
Everybody
Good
else
word.
going to accept the type of forgiveness you need, because that forgiveness is meant for you,
Yeah.
for what you went through, for who
Yeah.
you are in this season
Yeah.
of your life. And you can forgive somebody for their behavior, right? And forgive yourself for tolerating that. But to stay, right, is additional abuse for you.
Mm.
It's an additional abuse for you. And I didn't think about that until later. And so,
Yeah. I mean, I think we do that as women, and that's, we've got this deep capacity to love, and that's why I'm always like, as a woman, the words we speak come from a really deep place, and we can use that to bless, and we can also use that to curse. We carry deep, deep wells, and I 100% agree with you. I think sometimes in our over exuberance to want to love and to want to heal,
mhm.
we try to act like with the Holy Spirit. And it's absolutely not our place. It is just not our place. And we do that. We see people with good potential. And it's not even just in relationships. I've had that relationship situation where I saw red flags and I did the same thing. I thought, oh, it's because of all of these things he's been through. And so you adjust your expectations because this person's gone through a really bad marriage, and this person just
Yeah.
had a lot of like, just had a kind of like a knock on life, that kind of thing. And I was like, well, I didn't have that. So I started to adjust myself to
Mhm.
make room for his foolishness. Until one point I was like, hang on a minute, you need healing. And it's not in our strength. Like, I love that you said it's not, I can't force you to go to counseling. Like, I can suggest it, I can say this is what it did for me. But I
Yeah.
think sometimes we're so much more like involved and invested in somebody else's healing
Mhm.
more than they are in themselves. And
Even
it
though it's not
applies
our
in friendships as well.
responsibility.
Yeah, like, you have to say, I need to be healed. I can be there as a friend. I can maybe, say like, this is what I went through, this is what this experience helped me, etc. But in that relationship, I was like, no, you have weird issues, and they're not my issues. They're not my issues.
Yeah.
And the issues, I'm sorry for you. I can be sorry and I can be sad, but I don't have to carry them. And too often as women, we're like, let me help you carry those issues because I've got a strong back and I went through this and I did counseling and I'm a prayer warrior. I know how to pray, so I can pray you through those issues. And then the man is just acting like a buster, and we're sinking in his issues, which are not ours to carry. And I feel like, we have to be more, and it goes back to like, we have to be able to, we all make those mistakes. Like, there is not a single woman who can say, I have not made that kind of mistake. I
Yeah.
think it's just sometimes we learn when we're 25, sometimes we learn when we're 50. But all of us have
Learn.
made those mistakes where we've tried to carry busters who are not willing to do the work themselves, you
Yeah.
know? And you
Yeah.
just have to be able to say, like, this is what I think you should do. And it applies in friendships as well. They're friends that I've had who I just feel like, there's a friend who just went through a really bad breakup, and she
Mm,
became super, super negative. And I just thought, you can't like all your negativity is now poured onto your other friends. And
mhm.
I can't save you. You need to get to a point where you can get help. And sometimes that help can come from, I can be your friend and walk you through it, but sometimes you also have to say,
Yeah.
no,
Like,
this is
that's
a
just
bit much.
can't. It's not your
It's a bit much.
responsibility. It's
It's
not
not.
it's not your responsibility to jump in the pool of people's problems and
It's
people's
not.
issues and people's pain, and save them. Because you jump in the pool, you're going to drown with them, or you'll start to absorb everything that they're in the pool with. And how do you help them? And then you're gonna end up needing help yourself. The best
Exactly.
way to help somebody is to be out of the pool, right? And
And help
extend
them out.
the life raft. Extend them
Exactly.
the life raft. I can guide you to a therapist. I can
Yeah.
give you some books to read, right?
I
I
can
can
sit with you in silence, if
Right,
you need, I can do those things.
but I just and then I feel like, but if you do that with understanding, but I'm not your therapist, right? I'm
Exactly.
not your I'm not your counselor, right? I can give you the life raft by giving you strategies and giving you some support another way, giving you some numbers or some books or something, right? And that is the best way for me to help you because
Yeah.
I we will drown together and we
Mm,
will die a Romeo and Juliet's death for sure if I jump
exactly.
in here with you. So the best way I can help you is to make sure I'm strong enough, right, to even
Mm,
extend the life raft, right?
absolutely.
And allow you to take it or not. And when I
Mm,
recognize that you would rather me jump in the pool with you versus take the life raft, that is a red flag that you want me to go down with you.
yeah.
And you are only thinking of yourself, and that level of being self-absorbed is only going to hurt me in the end if
Exactly.
I give in to what it is that you're asking. That's not real help. That's actually not even real love. It's basically selfish, to be
Yeah.
honest. It's very
It is.
selfish.
It's very selfish, and I think we don't talk enough about toxic friends, and it's very selfish. It doesn't mean that people don't go through stuff, but like you're saying, it's like, how do you? What's your posture in those situations? And you need to be okay with friendships kind of evolving as well
Mhm,
as
or
people are
dissolve.
going through. Yeah, exactly. As life happens, and
Yeah,
being very honest um with, like, I think it takes two, again, just going back to maturity, it takes two mature people to be good friends.
yeah,
Like, my crap, I'm gonna share my crap with you, but my crap is not your crap.
right.
And can I be happy when I'm in my crap for you
Yeah,
when
for
you're in your season, and vice versa, you
yeah.
know? And
And
can
here
I trust you with my crap, but not, like you're saying, not expecting you to be my counselor, but just trusting you to be my friend.
yeah,
And I think
even
we've got to get to a place where we recognize that even in friendships, you can have a lot of abuse.
I know, and here's
And
the thing
we
about
need to
friends.
be able to, recognize that.
You can have friends that support the abusive situation you are in, right? I watched a show, I don't remember exactly which show, but it was 2 women, and one woman, she was in her relationship, they had this lavish life. I forgot, I think it was on one of the little drama hip hop wives type of shows,
Mm,
and she basically told another woman, "This is what you sign up for when you marry someone in this industry.
mm,
Yet sometimes you have to turn the other cheek and look the other way if you want this life or if you want this lifestyle. Sometimes this is what you have to endure, right?" And that is not the type of friend you want to keep because they support the abuse and
yeah.
abusive situation that you are in because their belief systems, right? So it's important to have, and I tell my girls this in my program, in my organization all the time, that you need to love yourself enough and know yourself enough so that you can choose your friends and not allow your friends to pick and
Absolutely.
choose you because
Absolutely.
sometimes that environment, that circle of friends will add additional abuse to stay in abuse because they're either jealous of you or misery
Hmm.
loves company and they want you to be just as miserable as they are and they want somebody to be able to relate to their experience, but you don't want to be in an abusive situation just so that you can have that friendship. If you have to get out of that relationship and then your friendship dissolves because of that, so be it.
Yeah.
It's very unhealthy because what is going to happen when you're in the hospital? I don't want my friend to just visit me in the hospital because the person that they encouraged me to stay with
You're
has
recommending.
to almost near death. I want someone to help me prevent that from happening and say, "Girl, you need to go. Come stay at my house. Come,
Exactly.
I'll help you figure it out. We will figure this out together. But I need you to not be in this situation because I love you and you love yourself and you deserve better."
Yeah.
And that I
So
think
important.
plays into that belief system and that mindset to how what you grew up seeing, what you were asked to tolerate, what you were asked to put up with. And you know, that's
So
that's
important.
that's a whole lot. So, we are like coming to the end of the show. So I wanna give some tips and some tools and some really important nuggets before we go. Because like I said, Belle and I, we do this together. We work with women all the time and young girls all the time apart, and we actually do it together on different projects that we've collaborated on. And what are some things to the women and the men who are watching? What are
Mhm.
some nuggets that they can take, that they can apply right now in the situation that they might be in, or to prevent them from being in, that will keep them from coming to one of our safe houses and one of our
Mhm.
transitional homes, to support being abused?
I think the most important thing is just really understand that you have value. You have incredible value. It's not defined by anybody else. And if you are in a situation that you feel like you've got signals, like I think we all feel it, like this is not correct, just come out of it. Figure out a way to come out and then assess it from the outside in. Sometimes it's very difficult to make decisions when you're in the situation. So
Mhm.
try to come out into a trusted space. Give yourself some time to then reflect on what's happening, from like a bird's eye, from a third party point of view. But I think the most important thing is really understanding that we have value, and to be really, really careful about where we put ourselves, what situations we put ourselves in, who we have surrounding us. There's certain decisions that you can't choose. You can't choose the family you're born into,
Mhm.
but you can choose the relationship that you have with them. So just because they're your parents or your siblings, or like Kiona shared, your uncle, you didn't choose those sets of relations, but you can adjust your relationship and your engagement with them. And so just really, really be conscious about the positions you put yourself in, the people that surround you, because they will speak life or death into you. And just
Mhm.
always know that you've got real value all by yourself, not because somebody else says it, but you have value all by yourself.
That's fantastic. I agree. One of the things that I can say to take away from those who are listening is, you know, the shame does not belong to you. The guilt, right? That is something that we give to ourselves that is very undeserving. Broken and damaged is a label that our hearts did not ever earn and does not deserve. And you can, like I said earlier, take yourself off of the cross that you've nailed yourself to. That is not your cross to bear. Abuse and punishment and hardship, that is not your cross to bear. You deserve forgiveness. You deserve grace. You deserve happiness and love, just and as much compassion as the next person, right? So don't tell yourself that you have to endure these things in order to receive love. You was born worthy of love upon arrival, right? And only seek to surround yourself with people who give you the experience that you dream of, because it is possible. It is there. God is everywhere. There's nowhere God is not, and he is not separated from us. So if you wouldn't want the God in you to endure something as heavy as emotional, physical, mental, verbal abuse, right? Then that means you don't deserve it as well. And there's going to be a hotline and some additional information that I will leave for anyone who is dealing with this, male or female, whoever you are, because no one deserves to be abused. So for all of those who are near you, Belle, where can they find you? Where can they reach out? How can they get in contact with you if they want to after the show?
So our organization is called the Pearl Safe Haven. So you can reach out on our social media handles or our website, the Pearl Safe Haven, which is HAVEN. And if you're in Ghana and going through abuse, we actually have a unit of the Ghana Police called DOFSU, which stands for Domestic Violence victim support unit. And they are actually dedicated to supporting survivors. We work super closely with them. They have a hotline as well. And so you can go directly to them or you can go through ourselves and we will get you connected. But the most important thing is there are people out there, there are advocates out there. There's so many people. They may seem discreet because we don't, put ourselves out there, but where you need help, help is available. And so if you're in a situation that you need to get out, please make use of that information. If you know somebody who's in the situation, please encourage them as well. Again, we can only encourage. Some people just need to go through the process, but those that help is available.
Great. Thank you so much, Belle. I'm so happy that we were able to have you. And, this was great information. So, all of you guys, tune in for the next episode. Take the nuggets, take the gems, share it for those who you feel like, could also use this great information and all of these tools and nuggets. And remember that loving yourself first matters, not second, not third, first.
So true.
Take care, everybody. Until next time, see you
Take
later.
care. Bye.